As some of you may know, my training is actually in academic history. I was the only member of the Taubman College of Architecture and Planning at the University of Virginia, of the University of Michigan, who had no training in either architecture or planning. Uh, so I was particularly, I think, attuned to the real gift of working with students and colleagues who are both deeply engaged, as all of you are, in historical research and also in practice. And I was also, I think, able to see some of the paradoxes of that relationship. Paradox, I'm sure the philosophers can define it. They would take the whole rest of the time. But for me, paradox is an apparent contradiction that might, in fact, hide a deeper truth. And so let me start with a few paradoxes. First of all, say you're visiting a city you've never been to. You want to be where it's hip. You want to be where there are, where the contemporary shines most strongly, where the galleries, the cafes, the boutiques, and so on are located. The street life. Where do you go? Where do you go? Well, I think, speaking for myself, you go to the oldest part of the city. That's where the contemporary thrives. And think about that for a minute. Why is that? I don't think it's a simple, I don't think there's a simple answer. For example, it's no longer true that the oldest parts of cities are the cheapest part. And yet, there is still that kind of strange paradoxical, relationship. And I think we know the basic answer, that it is in the old town. In other words, whatever, the old town might be literally medieval, it might be from the 1920s, but there's always an old town that we find a human scale, an array of welcoming and distinctively shaped public spaces, lively sidewalks, and of course Conrad's active frontages. Above all, what the philosopher Michael Walzer has called open-minded spaces. Open-minded spaces being things where many things can happen. That is why we go to the old town. And I think it shows a truth that contemporary urban designers are necessarily immersed at the scale and speed and the single-mindedness of modern development. So it's very difficult to produce these open-minded spaces. So we go, necessarily, we go to the past. So we come to what I would say is the central paradox of this talk, and one that I trust all of us have experienced in our work as historians of urban design. That is, so many of the designs we study are both behind us and ahead of us. And what that means to me is these designs come out of a world of limits and inequality and injustice, which we hope to have left behind, and yet genuinely understood, they are ahead of us in their capacity to inspire the kind of urban design we so desperately need today. So let me just give yeah, my own experience, which I hope in some ways kind of chimes with yours. Back in the 1970s, I was studying the remarkable organization, the Regional Plan of New York, and their plan of 1929. And I came across this and other plans done by the great engineer who was the real designer of Grand Central Terminal, William Wilgus, for regional rail and freight service. And this is one of the simpler ones. Among other things, he suggests a kind of well, for those of you who know Paris, a kind of region RER for the New York region. And I said, wow, this is ahead of what we could, what any of us, any transportation engineer, anybody could envision today. It's behind us, yes, it was made in 1929, and yet it opens up possibilities that in the bad years of the 1970s, just no one could see. So it's this paradox of so many of the plans we're studying. They're behind us and ahead of us in this creative way. Now, this reliance, shall we say, the way in which the past can open up possibilities in the future, I don't think is true of every profession. For example, if you went to a doctor, I don't think you'd want to go to one who told you that he or she was inspired by the past and past treatments and kind of got out the leeches. It's not everywhere. And perhaps most relevantly, this relationship of past and present was not, I think, characteristic, to say the least, of the modern movement in architecture and planning that still influences us today. To take the arch modernist Le Corbusier, and as one of my colleagues once said, what would we do if we didn't have Le Corbusier to kick around? But to start with Le Corbusier, he sees history, I think, as a set of breakthroughs that each of which leaves the past behind. One of his acolytes, Siegfried Gideon, expressed it in this way, that there is each epoch has a special relationship of space and time that is expressed in its greatest architecture, but also in its urban design. And history is, as it were, a single track. And at each stage, you necessarily leave behind the space and time relationship that has been replaced. So here I think, I don't know if you can read this. I'm not sure I can read it. This is from Le Corbusier's Vie radieuse, where he says, death is the sacrament of life. Without death, life has no meaning. Death implies a limit, a stage, a style, the whole, the achievement. Suddenly all is gone. Why don't we want to lead human achievements to the cemetery? Tools, houses, cities. We must set time limits. We must not bequest our residue to our heirs, since we do not bequeath our bodies. We're demolishing, yes, every day, but we must demolish well and firmly according to a healthy program. So I think what he's saying is we study the past in order to have the courage to destroy it. And this, I think, is the deeper meaning of his famous Plan Voisin from 1925. Yes, the the Louvre and some of the specific monuments of the past are survive, but the rest must be demolished to attain this new era of space and time. Another of Le Corbusier's acolytes, Jose Luis SUDHT, in 1942, Can Our City Survive? He says of this illustration, daring highway constructions have appeared lately in some American cities. These constructions, and what we're in fact looking at, is part of Robert Moses's Triborough Bridge. This is Harlem and North Manhattan. You can just see the Central Park and at the top of the slide. And he says these constructions announce a new urban scale. The park area, meaning the park in the foreground, and the stadium on Randall's Island complete the modern side of this picture. The rest of it presents a striking contrast. East Harlem, which is up above, East Harlem is still a mass of blighted tenements, their small scale corresponding to the old horse and buggy street patterns that still prevail in this district. The new flowing patterns of the highways do not belong to that outmoded period, but they predict a new city. So, looking at this, this remarkable vision, what if we reverse this picture and say it's the bottom half that is what Lewis Mumford called yesterday's city of tomorrow, and in a strange way, it's the top that truly predicts the new city, not the literal slum of East Harlem as it was then, but the grid, the human scale, the sidewalk life, the continuous streets. In other words, what if we took the old city as predicting the future? That is, I think, the challenge that we the challenge, the paradox. And I'd like to explore, as I say, some of these paradoxes. Let's start, as I was saying with Bob Shipley, that I come, my own immersion in the real world insofar as it exists started with the Congress for the New Urbanism, and especially the work of Peter Calthorpe. And I think Calthorpe is particularly interesting in terms of the relationship of, in terms of what is behind us and what is in front of us, what is to come. The issue, in high modernism, the streetcar was a useful and important tool of progress, but with the coming of the automobile, it was outmoded. It represented an older form of time and space. So even though it was so well developed, as we see in this map of the Buffalo and Niagara streetcar system from 1935, it has to go. It's part of this older framework. Oops. here's Peter Calthorpe. You could take Calthorpe, as simply copying the past, even part of the nostalgia for this streetcar era. But I think what is remarkable about his thinking is, first of all, he completely rejects the, if you'll permit the pun, the single track vision of history. The streetcar is not only behind us, but ahead of us. And he understands that to build streetcars after the automobile network, is to create a very different but important meaning for them. That the streetcar initially was a tool of mobility, of movement outside of the old city. That it's precisely the limitations of the light rail system, that you have to be within walking distance of the stop, that creates the conditions for real density, for real walkability, for a real regional system based on these centers. So the streetcar, or light rail, I should say, is both behind us and ahead of us. It has a new meaning, a new importance that is important above all to escape the limitations of the present moment. So, with all of this, I'd like to turn now, somewhat daringly, to the history of Buffalo itself, and to show, or try to show, how these two defining initiatives, what I would call the two defining initiatives of this city, the Erie Canal and the Olmsted-Vaux Park system that Conrad has already referred to, have this special quality of being behind us and ahead of us, as inspiring something that isn't present or obvious in this narrow present moment. Now, to start with the Erie Canal, I will admit that it is difficult to imagine that America could ever again be capable of the kind of infrastructure imagination, the kind of infrastructure audacity that the Erie Canal represents. And what is that? Simply put, in an era of water transportation, the Allegheny Mountains cut off the East Coast from the rest of the continent. So when, after the Louisiana Purchase, at a time when water routes were destiny, it seemed as if it was the destiny of the old settlement to be more and more isolated from the heart of the country, and that the whole structure of the way the water flowed should have made New Orleans the great metropolis of the United States. That's what this map means. It was inevitable. And what did that mean? That the great metropolis of the United States would be a slave city, would enrich the slave powers. But that doesn't happen. Instead, New York intervenes with the Erie Canal and in effect turns the country 90 degrees. Suddenly there's a route from the greatest natural port in North America, New York City, through the Hudson River, the Erie Canal to Buffalo, and then the whole Great Lake system, and finally into the heart of the Midwest. A complete reversal of what seemed to be inevitable. And of course, this, the issue of water transportation was that if you didn't have it, there was no point in, say, growing grain or whatever, because it cost more to transport the grain to wherever it could be sold than the grain was worth. So suddenly there was this immense flow, not only of grain, but of so many other commodities. The creation of this corridor from the Midwest, the Great Lakes, down to through Buffalo, down to the port of New York, that would become the most dynamic industrial corridor in the world, really from 1850 through to 1950. What an amazing result of this infrastructure investment. And in terms of Buffalo, we often think more of New York City, and Chicago. And I was surprised when I was doing the research for this paper, that for this presentation, that that from about 1890 to 1940, the largest shipper of grain in the world was not Chicago or New York, it was Buffalo. And the reason was that it's off this illustration, but the new fields, the new settlements were in northern Michigan, northern Minnesota, and so on. They shipped through Duluth. The Canadians shipped through Fort Williams. All of these traveled, bypassed Chicago, and concentrated on the in the grain elevators of Buffalo. And why was this significant? I mean, it was significant, I think, because the real issue in many ways, in terms of not only the prosperity of the country, but the issue of hunger throughout the world, is, could these masses of grain, these mountains of grain, be handled efficiently? Was it possible or conceivable? And the answer to this problem was, in fact, the grain elevator. The grain elevators were like dams holding back the flood of grain, starting with this, by the way, is from the Historic American Building Survey, a wonderful analysis, starting with the small grain elevators, locally the larger Great Lakes port, all converging on Buffalo. And Buffalo is the great regulator of this system, that prevented the overloading of the infrastructure, that moved the grain when it was needed through the Great Lakes, through the Erie Canal and the Barge Canal, as it was later called, through the railroads to the port of New York. So here's another wonderful illustration showing how these grain elevators took the grain from the Great Lakes freighters, stored it, and then transferred it, in this case, to railroad cars. An incredible system. And so I think just to stay with this, that these grain elevators, to me, are monuments to something that's very important, not just to Buffalo or the United States, but to the world, which is the conquest of hunger. You know, for the first time, human beings knew how to, you know, how to not just sow and harvest these massive quantities, but how to handle them, how to ship them, how to preserve them. And so this to me is a, you know, is a moment, an essential moment in human history. I want to go on now to talk, you know, to talk about the Olmsted Park system. Again, a remarkable achievement that is both behind us and ahead and ahead of us. Olmsted, yeah, here again is that amazing or somewhat battered his sketch for the park system, courtesy of the New York Public Library. What is, you know, this? It seems simple, but behind it is some very complex thought, and this is, you know, that Olmsted understood very well. The need for great cities in the United States, you know, the ability of to create what the economists call agglomeration economies, such as we saw with the grain elevators. You need scale, but scale means congestion. It means pollution. It means, you know, as Olmsted recognized, not only the physical strain and destructiveness of overcrowding, but the psychological effects of of these great cities. So he had a very deeply ambivalent vision. And, you know, how do you deal with this? What is the solution? The solution is the park. And not just the park, but the park system. In other words, what you need the parks for, and, you know, Olmsted, I guess, one could claim that he was our first landscape architect, you know, not only landscape architect, but I should say landscape urbanist, because, you know, he saw, you know, not just the individual park, but the system. Drawing population from the congested heart of the city of Buffalo, healing the wounds, the psychological and physical wounds of you know, of life in the large city, through ultimately through the beauty of these environments. In other words, he saw, you know, he saw that the city to thrive needs to contain its opposite. It needs to contain, you know, again, kind of paradoxically, this pastoral world of beauty, of community, of egalitarian coming together. That was amazing, really. And I think and hope that it's part of our future as well as our past. So it means creating, you know, great individual parks like Delaware Park today, but also, you know, these amazing parkways that, again, show, I think, a certain, you know, a complexity that is very difficult for us to appreciate and understand, because they represented, you know, these different forms of movement. There was rapid movement through the central carriageways, a little less rapid on the bridle paths that could be converted as they were into bicycle paths, then pedestrian sidewalks for you know, for sociability, all in this framework of really astounding beauty that luckily Buffalo still has today, and not sadly as much as it did. I think one of the as everyone who's encountered this era, that the destruction of parts of the parkway, especially the Humboldt Parkway, as you can see. In other words, the highway engineers simply could not, to my mind, simply could not understand a system that was that complex. The problem was that the Humboldt Parkway was just too good for them. And as a result, the only thing they could do is destroy, to create this single-minded space. Where Olmsted had the open-minded space, the engineers have the single-minded space. And I do want to particularly congratulate, one thing that Buffalo has is just a wonderful group of dedicated scholars, activists, people who, if the Olmsted city is in our future as well as the past, I think it owes so much to people like Frankowski and to Robert Shipley, who is sitting here right now. So here's the proposal for the recreation, insofar as possible, of the Humboldt Parkway. So something from the past is also the future. So let me conclude. If I can find it here, with some, Frankowski, in his 2013 book, The Best Planned City in the World, Olmsted Vox and the Buffalo Park System, writes, "The demise of Humboldt Parkway was the most egregious of the many insults that the park and parkway system was to suffer in the latter half of the 20th century." He goes on to say, "As in many other places, a sense of history and an appreciation of urban life were absent from the city's political circles," which I can well believe. And I hope I'm in sympathy with Kowski, with Bob Shipley and others, when I try to define what this sense of history and appreciation of urban life is. And I hope all of us at this conference will contribute to extending, modifying, and if necessary, correcting my definition. So a great city, to borrow Walt Whitman's phrase, a great city contains multitudes, not only diversity in ethnicity and racial groups, but diversity in time. As Lewis Mumford put it, through the durable buildings and institutional structures and even more durable forms of literature and art, the city unites times past, times present, and times to come. Within the historic precincts of the city, time clashes with time. Time challenges time. Time, in other words, becomes visible. The historic fabric embodies otherwise lost values of time past, hence the vital importance of preservation. But so too does the historic record of urban design initiatives, perhaps especially those never built, or like the streetcar systems and the Humboldt Parkway, built and later destroyed. Yes, the historic always bears to some degree the scars of society's life. In the United States, the legacy of racial segregation, racial and class segregation. But we can and must learn to overcome that legacy, in large part because the designs carry with them a sense of hope and possibility, so often difficult to summon up in the present. And they are available to us as never before through the digitalization of so many archives. What is needed above all is to grasp these designs as contemporary, indeed more than contemporary, as paths to the future of cities, as well as to their past. That is the gift of our research to the practice of urban design and to the building of great cities. Thank you.
Good time for questions. I will have to run a Does anyone have questions? Surely this must have raised questions. I will have to run to every question here with a microphone.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Conrad.
Get my steps in. This is good.
Thank you so much for your presentation, for getting started, for getting the conference started with such an inspiring presentation. I really appreciated your point about the paths that become futures, and we in our in-between chronological situation can appreciate both. So for example, the tramways, I think that's one of the best examples of a very dense network in the past, completely disappears, and then the attempt of making a comeback. I'm wondering if there are any pasts that we are currently facing that you think will become urban futures, or is that a kind of guesswork that we can't quite do in the present?
Any past that we've neglected?
That we're currently erasing, the same way that the parkway and the tram systems were erased.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's a good question. You know, it's a good question and a good challenge. I mean, I think that in other words, just taking my own particular field of research, which is, as Conrad mentioned, which is in part suburbs and suburbanization, that I think there is a tendency to see the suburbs as kind of uniformly bad, uniformly dispersed. That one thing that that Calthorpe kind of revealed is that if you look carefully at the suburban environment, there are these little town centers that are often struggling. There are elements that of density and walkability that can be strengthened, especially if they're connected to a regional transit system that that gives this density meaning and efficiency. As I say, I've been expecting, in other words, I started this research, God, the 70s, in other words, every decade I've expected, this kind of investment. And I perhaps should have said, the real weakness of transit-oriented development is that you need transit. You need to build transit. And somehow we haven't done it. But if we were to look, to really take that heritage seriously, we would see immense opportunities, not just in the larger cities, but in the area we just see as this diffuse, sprawled out suburbia. Yeah.
Hi, sorry, I don't know how far away to hold this thing. You mentioned the restoration of Humboldt Parkway, and I was curious what your thoughts are on, as you mentioned, there's a lot of like staunch supporters of environmentalism in Buffalo, which I'm very grateful for, who are very vocally in opposition to the restoration of the Humboldt Parkway because of the like toxic tunnel, if you've seen those signs. And I am ambivalent about it. Like, I don't have a strong take. I'm just curious what you think, because, whenever people talk about Buffalo, they talk about how the 33 cut a neighborhood in half and destroyed the parkway. And I'm curious if you think Buffalo could function without the 33. Could you get rid of it entirely and bring it back to the parkway? Do you think that the tunnel really is that toxic? Just sort of an open-ended question, I guess, about the parkway and the 33. Also, thank you for your lecture.
But maybe to preface also for the Zoom audience, the 33 is the expressway that currently runs through the
Yeah.
Humboldt Parkway. And there has been a proposal to put a roof on it, kind of resembling a parkway for part of it. That is currently the contention locally in Buffalo. Can you partially restore something, or should we fully remove and replace with the former parkway? Of course, we're not here to put you on the political spot.
Yeah.
No pressure.
I mean, I'll I'll evade the question, but to me, again, one of the things that I've learned from that has inspired me has been precisely this movement, which of course is we find in in Rochester, in Milwaukee, and in so many other cities. To to eliminate the highway, to go back to the to the boulevard, to go back to this as I said, this wonderfully complex and open way of transportation. And at first it was just dismissed as crazy. It's taken hold, and I think we have to. In other words, I think one of the responsibilities really of a group like this is to make sure that our fellow citizens understand that that highways are not forever. They came and they can go, and that as I've tried to say, the past achievements can be our future as well.
Yes, Simon.
Thank you for a fascinating lecture. My question is maybe, I wouldn't say controversial, but I try to be the devil's advocate. Do you already see any pitfalls of the pasts that are ahead of us?
Pitfalls in the yeah. I'm sorry, my ears are not too great.
Do you see any problems with the pasts that are ahead of us, the in front of us, the recreation of the past ideas?
Yeah.
As you spend your life researching suburbia, I'm hoping you do.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a great question, and I will admit that I do tend to a certain nostalgia, to loving the past for its own sake, to ignoring or trying to ignore the reality of what life was like in Buffalo, say in 1850 or 1875. I mean, I'm not as bothered as some people, by the quote unquote inauthenticity of reviving the past. I think that cities were never authentic. They were always imitating something, pretending to be something they were not. So I'm more than happy, shall we say, with the inauthentic, if at least it's copying something wonderful. But I realize that there is a problem, a much deeper problem, with the simulacrum, with going too far in terms of a superficial imitation. And that, again, I think is a challenge for urban design. When do you accept this simulacrum, and when does it undermine the whole enterprise, the deeper goals of the project?